Hey everybody, Paul Elam here with An Ear for Men, and going to be talking today, having a chat. This chat is with Peter Wright of gynocentrism.com, and also in a way, Peter is with An Ear for Men.com. So much of his work and what he's done on gynocentrism.com for so long, a lot of his thinking, a lot of the research that he's done, both in the psychological terms and historically and philosophically, has certainly been a big influence in my life. We just collaborated on a piece recently called Chasing the Dragon. You can find that on all the sites. You can find it on my YouTube channel at An Ear for Men, the An Ear for Men website, and the Voice for Men website. What it is basically is a historical, philosophical overview of what men's lives have come to be, and a lot about the relationship between men and women. And we just sort of wanted to have a little chat about that this evening. And this is going to be available for Patreon subscribers only, as sort of an act of appreciation for your guys coming to support An Ear for Men on Patreon. We'll probably make this available to the general public in a month or so, but we want you guys to have first shot at it. So hopefully we'll come through loud and clear for you and have a good discussion. And with that, I think I've rambled enough to get us started. I want to say hello to Peter Wright and say how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Paul, and good to be talking with you again.
Same here. That was quite a project to undertake, that lengthy article, all the references, all the history in it, and then producing the video. We teamed up and worked on that for quite a while, but I think it was worth it. The one thing really, it's a group of three that sort of stands out in my mind, I thought we might talk about tonight, is the three attributes in females that trigger more or less servile behavior in men, and sort of trigger our, I don't want to call it instincts, but our training, if you will, our historical training for romantic chivalry and for self-sacrifice. What do you think? Is that a fair enough way to put it?
It is, yeah. I mean, I think it triggers both of those things. It triggers our primitive instincts and our training, both, which is a pretty powerful combination. But in the article, we referred to romantic love as what do we call it? A cluster of superstimuli. We may as well have called it a clusterfuck of superstimuli, really.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I've certainly had a clusterfuck of super responses in my younger days.
Yeah. So the one of the intriguing ones for me was the neotenness, the power of neoteny to sort of awaken the parental brain. Very, very powerful. And yeah.
I think we probably ought to clarify with that too, because, there's always going to be somebody that needs to point out that neoteny is juvenile characteristics that are, by the strictest definition, naturally occurring. We are talking about artificially produced, manufactured neoteny in women through the use of cosmetics, the way they dress, even behavioral characteristics. So it is not real neoteny, but I think it's still enough to trigger the parental brain. And so to understand that, I was hoping maybe I could get you to discuss a little bit about what the parental brain is so that people know.
Well, the parental brain, I mean, it's really quite simple. It evokes in us a sense of vulnerability in the person who's evoked it, whether that's a baby or a child or the woman who's faking juvenile characteristics. Basically, it evokes a sense that they need protection and caretaking. And I don't know what it is in our neurological system, but when we're faced with that, the result is immediate.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the brain really doesn't care if you've got an actual juvenile or child there that triggers your instinctive protection, or if you just have the cues on an adult. The brain's reaction is fundamentally the same. I mean, we may have conscious discernment, but we're certainly going to be more prone to caretaking and protecting behaviors with a neotenic appearance than we would be otherwise, correct?
That's absolutely right. And I think in one of our conversations, you pointed out that, it doesn't matter whether the neoteny is fabricated and faked, or whether it's, it really does endure in some people from childhood. The parental brain doesn't know the difference. So that's absolutely correct.
And now, what does that say? Because, here's, we get into a sort of tricky area, Peter, is that we've got the parental response, but it's tied to sexual response as well. I mean, these things commingle. So we've got this caretaking protective response, but it also comes with an erection.
That's a very awkward situation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's very powerful.
It is very powerful. It's really it merges into the territory of pedophilia. That's the obvious conclusion, because on the one hand there's this immense focus on or concern for a child, you might say. And at the same time, there's arousal that comes through other cues, like the way a person behaves, their clothing, their sexual overtures and whatnot. And to mix those two together is, like I said, a very awkward thing, really, but it works.
Well, and I wonder if that combination too is where we begin a process. And I don't have any kind of even scientific or even really a psychological name for it. But what I've noticed in men, and I'm talking about myself here, particularly from younger life, but what I notice in men is they make romantic attachments to women. That you have this response to neotenic appearances, and you have the parental brain engaging, you have sexuality engaging. This is a confusing mess. And so part of it is, maybe is it possible that one of the complaints from feminists over the years that men don't see women as being fully autonomous human beings? It sounds like there's some truth to that we may, and I don't mean it in the same way feminists do, because they place nefarious, abusive, patriarchal, powered shitlord motives behind that stuff. But it seems to me kind of obvious that we're responding almost like a bag of chemicals and then filling in fantasies about the character of the person as we go along in order to justify the continuance of the connection. Did that make sense?
It did, yeah. The complaint you're referring to is by feminists is that men objectify women, but that's really the second part in a process. The first part is women objectify themselves. They play a part or they play a role, and like they play a role of the child, for instance. They play a role of someone very sexy. So they're not necessarily acting relaxed and natural. They're sort of playing these parts and then complaining when they're objectified.
Oh, I thought, gosh, Peter, I thought they put on a lot of makeup and wore very, very revealing clothing because for other women and to make themselves feel good.
Just for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for their self-esteem. It's not to have any kind of sexual power over men.
That's right. Yeah.
But in our state of being under the neotenic trance, as it were, there's a whole lot of men that'll believe that crap, that they really aren't dressing up to get attention from men or to seek power over them.
That's right. That's right. And this is where the awareness comes in. People have got to start, well, it would help people to start thinking about, why is this woman wearing a $500 dress, and why is she wearing sunglasses that are far too big for her face? I think they're called supersized sunglasses, which are the trend right now. And I think these are to create sexual attributes, they're to create large eyes and neoteny look. And men have got to realise that this is for them. It's for the men. It's targeting the man, and he's got to wake up out of that trance, really.
Yeah, if you're by any chance are listening to this, maybe in your car somewhere, and you have not had a chance to read the article or see the video, one of the things that was pointed out very specifically in that is that if you look in medium like anime or Disney characters or video games or any of that, and no, we're not turning into Anita Sarkeesian here, you see women with childish faces almost, and you see them with very, very large eyes. And I don't think it's coincidence that there's a fashion trend toward anything that makes a woman's eyes appear larger, even when they're covered by sunglasses.
That's right. Yeah. And this particular biological drive, this concern for juvenile, or concern for children, basically, it's so powerful. I was just thinking about it yesterday, how it's already awake in children. So the parental brain is already operational in 2- and 3-year-olds who they watch these Disney cartoons. They watch a lot of a lot of the Disney movies, for instance. They have princesses and princes and different characters with very large eyes. And this is really turning something on in the kids. And I think it's the parental brain already. Or they like small, pets, like cats and dogs, particularly babies, baby cats, baby dogs. And I think this is awakening that same part of their brain. So that gives you an indication of how it's present from very early in the life of a human right through to the end. And it can be very easily exploited, not only by the movie makers, the Disney sort of industry, but also by adult women in social interactions.
Yeah, what else I've noticed with children too is they will. I mean, if it's true we have a parental brain, and there's a lot of neuroscience that goes into establishing the fact that we do have a parental brain, or a state of brain activity that puts us in the parental rescuing, caretaking mode. I also see children, even in efforts that you might think beyond their years, at 3, 4, 5 years old, that recognize the parental response in adults and manipulate them with it.
Oh, right. Very good point. Very good point. Yeah.
And so I think this is tied into that too, but we socialize boys to quit that. They at a certain point, boys quit being cute when they're playing helpless.
That's right. Don't be a sissy. Toughen up. That's
and
right.
It's actually, I mean, I don't want to get too far on a sad track here, but I think that's a pretty good message. We got a lot of feminists out there saying that we are damaging boys by shutting down their feelings. And I guess to some degree that there's some truth of that, but it's also the fact that feelings need to be managed when you go into adulthood, because you can't function as an adult without managing your feelings. Yet we teach boys that they must learn to manage their feelings and to put intellect over their feelings. We teach girls just the opposite, that staying in a feeling state and being emotional and being manipulative will pave your way, especially if you're attractive.
That's right. They're taught to, women are taught to exploit juvenile characteristics, vulnerability, neediness, um, and boys are taught to stop that stuff. I mean, I can't imagine a world where, well, I don't want to imagine a world where boys are not taught to put that stuff away and grow up. Can you imagine men and women both trying to compete for childhood status? To see who can get cared for the most.
Well, unfortunately, Peter, I think we're already starting to see some elements of that. It's not near like it is in the female population because, that's just been socially ingrained for centuries upon centuries now. But we do have a sharp increase across the board culturally in narcissism. And I know that CEOs of large companies are now complaining that young men enter the workforce without understanding that they actually have to do what they're told. And they get upset when they have to do their jobs. And that lack of maturity is something that is starting to infect our young men.
Right.
Certainly
so
not
what
all
happens
of them.
when a couple gets together, then they're competing to see who will be the parent and who will be the child, and that would probably account for a large amount of the arguments they have. To see who can position themselves into that particular spot, into the cared for one. So,
yeah, we could get into a long discussion on transactional analysis with that because that is the struggle of relationships. But let's move on to point 2, which is the manufactured sexual enhancements that women are obsessed with. And I guess we should start by laying out one of the ground rules here that men, I think, instinctively all know, but they don't honor and don't think about. Pussy is power. Female attractiveness is enormous power. They can have men killing each other for the attention of an attractive woman. It still happens all the time. It promotes violence. Tammy Bruce comes on and talks about how women have a civilizing effect on men. I don't really think so. I think bachelorhood has a tendency to civilize men more than sexual competition, but that's a little off the topic. But
agreed.
We've got a huge cosmetic surgery and cosmetic industry, fashion industry. We're talking about countless billions of dollars a year going into the way women look. Giving them big eyes, giving them nice asses, giving them nice big firm tits, and good skin. And this is because it's power over men. It's because this is what it takes to get men to, bow and scrape and get them to do what you want them to do.
That's right. It's really interesting. If you go back into history, let's say ancient Greece, society had prohibitions on using those advantages into adulthood. So, for instance, when it comes to using childhood characteristics to gain power over your mate, that was frowned upon. When a woman came into a marriage, she had to take her childhood toys and literally throw them away as part of a ritual the day before a marriage. She wasn't allowed to sort of play with her husband. By the use of juvenile characteristics. And there was also prohibitions on how sexily a woman could dress. And still to this day in some Muslim countries, for instance. So societies intuitively knew they would instill in both men and women what Freud would call a superego or a conscience that stopped them exploiting these very powerful, what would you call them, manipulations. But today, it's open slather. Not only women, but men can start using them too. So.
Oh, absolutely. You brought up an interesting point about some Muslim countries still have the prohibition on showing a lot of skin and accenting a lot of a woman's beauty. I mean, and this varies wildly there are countries that where the women will wear a headscarf, but I mean they'll have their tits hanging out all over the place, and then there's much more extreme areas where the whole body is clothed and covered all the way to full burqas. But I think that that's really considered oppression in a lot of ways. The women in those countries generally don't feel that way. And to me, that sort of reflects two things. One, a consciousness of the power of female attractiveness, that they've developed customs and codes to keep that from dominating in society.
Maybe just jump in there. Maybe it's a consciousness of superstimuli.
That's what I'm
Not
thinking.
only female attractiveness, but a consciousness of how it can be exaggerated.
And how crazy that men get.
Right.
And how servile they get, which they do. I mean, you look at, oh my God, American men, Australian men right now just are shadows of a past masculinity that just barely exists anymore, except for a few small pockets. But another part of that too, and I've had Skype conversations with Ali Mirispond, who lives in Iran. And the other part of that is that it also enhances some of the power, because if you want to lift the veil, you really have to work hard.
Right.
So just knowing the stimuli are there is enough to garner some power. But I think it does keep some of that at bay. But we actually have women. I mean, there's some botched plastic surgeries where women are disfigured for life. And we tend to say, man, that's a real, the doctor was a butcher. And sometimes that's true. Or, what a shallow, sad pursuit. Understand, you may want to call it shallow, but the pursuit of beauty in that light is the pursuit of power, as surely as if you were working your way up to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
Right.
It is actual power in this culture.
I remember talking to a woman who was considering having breast implants. Well, not only considering, she was dead set going to do it. And I talked with her about the different ones that could be purchased. There was saline bags that could be inserted, and also the silicone bags. And I think everyone knows with the silicone bags, if they break, they can leak silicone through the body and cause cancers and all sorts of major problems. It's deadly, basically. But as I talked to her, she explained that the silicone ones are superior in the way they feel and the way they look. Whereas the saline filled bags, they don't look as real, they don't feel as good, they slosh around when you move, and they tend to develop a hardened crust of tissue around the outside of the bag. The body forms a reaction against them. So all in all, the silicone bags look much better. And I pointed out to her that they were deadly, and she said she doesn't care at all. She just wanted to have that look, to have that power that you're talking about over the people who would be looking at her. So that tells you how powerful how powerful power is. It's people want it more than their own life, basically.
And it does, upon occasion, cost them their lives. I mean, there have been people die sometimes under general anesthesia, unpredictably, all in the pursuit of sexual power. And I guess that's, that is part of the wiring that we have as human beings, whether you want to call it sociobiology or biopsychology or just socialization. Women pursue power through attractiveness, and they prefer that over pursuing it through work, and have always. That's why women are so miserable now in the modern age. Another thing we brought up in that article and the video was that the misery index for women right now in this world of having it all, really high. Women are just basically unhappy. and because you can never have it all.
No,
Which is something every guy will tell you.
that's right. I
Because
think
we learn that.
another word for power is narcissism. There's a very strong urge in human beings to get narcissistic recognition and gratification. Men want to be heroes, for instance. That's the same thing at work. Women want to be stared at and indulged as beautiful. But underneath all of these things is this strong urge for narcissism, or this narcissistic drive, let's put it that way. But the strange thing is, the more successful you are in gaining narcissistic attention, the more you drive people away, because it becomes a preoccupation that sort of how would you put it?
An addiction.
An addiction, and it doesn't allow for a natural human relationship. It's really just feeding time. Every time someone gets with another person, if narcissism is their aim, it's feeding time at the zoo, and there's no room for a more gentle human relationship in that.
Think about it, guys. If she hooked your attention with a pair of 38 double Ds that she or some other poor slob paid 10 or 15 grand for, you might not know who you're with until she really makes you miserable right along with her. Okay, let's move on to the third and final part of this triad of terror that seems to infest the lives of so many men. I mean, so much so that a lot of guys have a hard time hearing this stuff. I think that the reality of our human nature and our socialization, our conditioning, our history is upsetting to hear sometimes, because I know guys, even though they wouldn't been it sometimes, they love the idea of like being really in love with a beautiful woman, right? And that's a great fantasy, that she's hot and she loves you and you love her and you fit together perfectly and happily ever after. They believe in that fantasy shit just as much as women do. So it's kind of hard to hear. But that brings us to the third part of this, which is how do I want to say this? The disingenuously induced pair bonding instinct. Is that going to do, or can we do better than that?
No, I think that's a that's a good start. When you say disingenuous, the first word that came to mind is love bombing, which is disingenuous, and that's exactly what a lot of people put forward when they're in the beginnings of or exploring a relationship. They love women, they love bomb the man, and sometimes the man love bombs the woman with flowers and all the rest of it too. So, but this is not natural behaviour. It's unlikely to continue after a few months. So,
can we stop on that and just say that again one more time? This is not natural behavior. It's not maintainable behavior. You can do it for as long as you're briefly and intensely infatuated. But if you think that you're going to spend the rest of your lives bringing home flowers every other day and, oh, darling, let me get that for you, man, so you got to ask yourself, why do we go into relationships with this sacrificial, my newfound love is perfect, there's nothing flawed about her whatsoever, and I'll strike any man down who says otherwise? That's a sort of insanity we take into relationships that are triggered by neoteny and that are based on all these images and history and the narrative of romantic chivalry. That's what we bring in, is this totally insanely unrealistic expectation of what a relationship is going to be like. And lo and behold, they fall apart like clockwork, don't they?
They sure do. They sure do. It's it's the intensity of that love bombing that people do to each other. It's very similar to what you referred to as chasing the dragon. When a person has their first hit of opium or heroin or something else, it's a perfect high. And after that, it's very hard to replicate that again. And I think it's the same with that love bombing in the beginning. It gives you such a high, but over the months and years ahead, the flowers or the love bombing, it just doesn't replicate those first experiences.
Let me ask you this. When we talk about love bombing, we're a lot of times, because this is a men's issues discussion and ever is, we talk about women love bombing and how they, you're the greatest guy I've ever met. And, oh, you're so perfect. How did you get to be so perfect? I can't believe I landed a guy like you. All the stuff that just copious amounts of gooey, sticky, saccharine adulation that gets heaped on somebody. And that's what we think of when we think of love bombing. But I'm wondering, Peter, if that set of silicone implants actually is a part of the love bomb that precedes the behavioral aspect of it.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I mean, we could almost have entitled one of the subheadings of, we're referring to superstimuli, things that are exaggerated, which have a very strong pull on human nature. But we could have had a subheading of love bombing, would have fit perfectly, really. These exaggerated behaviours that, they just, they pull an exaggerated super response from people, don't they?
Yeah, it's almost like that the cultural condition is to love bomb one way or another. Every time a woman puts on mascara or wears something revealing before she goes out to the club, those are real powerful signals meant to draw and get power over men, just like, fawning over them with compliments is ultimately intended to breed power. And
so it's all about power. That's right. And when you clear away all the love bombing and the exaggerated behaviour, and it has to be cleared away to see what's really there, you might be left with nothing. You might be looking at a person and feel like, I've got nothing in common with this person. I don't feel any bond with them. I feel nothing. So it's important to clear that stuff away and see what's there. But if you do clear it away, what you might find is the potential for a bond based on more simple ideas, less electrifying feelings. Words that come to mind are friendship, or companionship would be another one. These are things that there's an author. His name is Robert A. Johnson. He's a Jungian psychologist. He referred to these feelings of friendship and companionship as sturdy oatmeal love. That's what he called it.
And I want to expand on that, I think, because it is. Yeah, I mean, we've just got through identifying a whole slew of problems, and this was just a fraction of the conversation that we could have had. But I do think it's important to bring in some possible solutions to the matter, even if they're complicated like this one. We're predisposed, if living with our historical narrative and the stories that have been carried down from generation to generation, all the way back to we've dated it to the 12th century. At least that was the first widespread incident of it, and that the story of romantic chivalry has carried ever since then, at least in the West. Now, in many places in the East, where they still do arranged marriages, which, by the way, work out a lot better because people have an interest in staying married, and they're put in a position where they have to develop friendship.
Well, that's what happens. Just briefly cut in there. That's what happens is in arranged marriages, the people who arrange it, often the families, they look for people who will make good companions because of their particular social station, their particular whether they'll be good friends and so on and so forth. The families are interested in these matching qualities. they don't necessarily put two people together who are not suited. And that's a myth we perpetuate in the West about arranged marriages. So what you see in arranged marriages is often very congenial, companionable relationships that last a lot longer than we have in the West.
Absolutely. And that was part of the point, because I would just want to look for a couple of minutes at the difference in these two models, because you have in arranged marriages, in arranged relationships, you've got a sense that there's not this, not necessarily, I'm sure sometimes it happens, but there's not necessarily this automatic, super response to super stimuli connection that happens that triggers infatuation. The families don't introduce the couple to each other and then 10 minutes later they're all in love and panting over each other, the way that relationships in the West start. And the way they start in the West is that people fall in love and they go through a period, a honeymoon period, where there's very little conflict and all they do is fuck like rabbits and view each other as perfect. And then, of course, as that fades, because it's not maintainable, then the conflict sets in. Then you have two different people that don't know who the other one is because they have not bothered to find out. During all the infatuation, they learned nothing about each other. When the conflict starts is when they start learning about each other. And you have two different people from two different backgrounds, two different sets of rules. This one, puts the toilet paper on so that the one side comes off the top, the other one does it off the bottom. One family opens Christmas on presents on Christmas Eve, the other on Christmas Day, and they start fighting about all this crap that they bring in with their families, and they will spend 20 years battling it out with each other. And then they can finally, if they survive that, which most don't, get it? Most don't survive the power struggles after romantic love is the base of the relationship. They end up, if they survive it, becoming friends. They may not be having sex a lot or at all, but they are partners, they are connected, and they finally do reach a sense of love for each other. But your shot of that happening, I think, and we can look at the divorce rates in various countries that have arranged marriages versus the West. And it appears to me like that marriage lasting has a much, much better chance of happening when the marriage is arranged, not when two people meet, fall in love. The word fall should be a cue too, because when I fall, that shit hurts, especially at my age. But when people fall in love and then make commitments to each other and go, grab a place to live together and then figure out they don't know each other, that breeds a lot of problems.
It sure does. And it's amazing how many times you hear that from couples they've had their hit of heroin, their romantic love, their super stimuli, whatever the hell we want to call it. But as that starts to fail over the months and years, the woman will come out or the man will come out and say, I thought I knew you. I don't know you at all. Who are you? And that's the situation we put ourselves in with this game, with these games we play.
Yep, I got to tell you, I've been through it. I remember the day exactly, several years into marriage, waking up next to my wife and asking myself, who the fuck is that?
That's right. And when you really get to know each other is when that other stuff is wiped away, all that romantic garbage, and you get down to, which way you both like to have the toilet paper, like you said before, how you like to cook the oatmeal, the breakfast in the morning, a whole lot of little details about the daily round. And, you talk about those really mundane things and you come to some sort of compromise and your lives start to merge and they become compatible. And if that works, then a bond starts to form. a very powerful one over time.
Yep. If I had everything to do over again, and I ended up, I'm certainly there's probably a lot better examples than me, but I am an example of this. When I figured out that getting into a relationship based first on friendship and some respect, when I figured out that that was going to be the standard I applied, my very next relationship turned out to be the one that I'm still in 14 years later. So figure
wow. There you go. There you go.
And of course, it's hard. Still, you still have problems in relationships, but there's no part of me anymore that says, "Gee, what happened to that perfect woman?" Right? I knew she wasn't perfect going into it, and I'm not trying to chase the dragon, trying to get it back, and that helps a lot.
That's right. The dilemma comes in sort of downsizing from that heroin, if you like, to our naturally produced endorphins in the body. It's what we're talking about here is, to use an analogy, it would be like going up to a heroin addict and saying, look, heroin's causing you a lot of problems. You're having to steal money to, perpetuate your habit, and it's wrecking your health and making you miserable. I think if you just stop taking that and relied on your natural endorphins, you've got a much better chance of success at being happy. Well, we know the result of what that conversation would be, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And I'll tell you what, you have to be really careful too, because one thing I know of all the stereotypes of human men, most of them being incorrect, one of them that I have found to be true is that when they're triggered by neoteny and by romantic chivalry into a super response, their dick will tell them anything. Their programming will tell them anything. Oh yeah, she's my friend. You don't even know her middle name. Oh, but she's the greatest. Very hard to talk to a guy in that mode. Matter of fact, I mean, every guy knows stories of some guy walking around in a daze because he's goofy over some girl, and all of his friends know that she's a big time loser, right? And they want him, trying to tell him, man, you need to get away from that. They don't listen. And so the time to get this stuff in your head is when you're not infatuated with someone.
That's right. And to get it into your head that there's going to be a lot of failures and a lot of misery that come along with that infatuation. So
guaranteed. Well, I think we've had a lengthy enough discussion for today. I think it opens the doors, Peter, for a lot more discussions in the future. I would certainly like to be having them. Again, folks, this is we're just putting this out here for the Patreon subscribers because I figured the you guys that care enough about the work to pitch in and help with it must be enjoying this stuff, or you wouldn't do that. And so we want to offer something out there to you. We'll probably make this available later, who knows, but we definitely at first and for some time, just the Patreon subscribers are going to get this. Also, there is, there may be some sound quality issues that we have to work out. If you'll bear with us, we'll get it all sorted out and get this thing all as it should be. But in the meantime, we're going to put these out here. And if you got any questions or ideas for discussions that you'd like to hear as a subscriber, please let us know. I know I'd be happy to talk about them. I'm sure Peter would too.
I'd be more than happy to. Yep. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, Peter, thanks. And we will see you guys next time.
Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.